Hello, Lara Broderick here to talk about the Scopes trial. Dr. L.M. Aldridge, the chairman of the World Christian Fundamentalist Association, declared at the start of the Scopes trial in Tennessee and the skirmishes which have occurred in the various denominational conventions are but forerunners of the real war that is coming. We may lose a few battles, but we will win the war, because 1900 years of history that bear eloquent testimony to the fact that the Bible not only weathers the storm of fire and sword, but crushes its adversaries and sends them into oblivion. No organization that has led the destruction of the Bible, their objective, has survived. In the summer of 1925, the American Civil Liberties Union announced that it was willing to offer its services to anyone willing to challenge the new Tennessee anti-evolution statute. The ACLU was becoming alarmed by many of the anti-evolution laws that were spreading across the country and wanted to challenge their constitutionality in court. The Tennessee Butler Law was one act that the ACLU desired to challenge. In the summer of 1925, at Fred Robinson's drugstore in Dayton, Tennessee, George Rappelia, a 31-year-old from New York and a local coal company manager, arrived at the drugstore and read the ACLU's advertisement. Rappelia, a modernist Methodist with contempt for the new law, argued to other town leaders that a trial would be a way of putting Dayton on the map. Dayton's population had fallen from 3,000 in the 1890s to only 1,800 by 1925. Rappelia also hoped that it would spur interest in his mining business. Others became convinced that a trial would help their town. Rappelia asked his friend John Scopes, who had taught math and coached football at the local Ray County High School, if he would be interested in pursuing a trial. Scopes had no background in science and had only been a substitute teacher for the science teacher who had fallen ill the last 2 weeks of school. However, Scopes had instructed students in science and had asked them to review evolution in their textbooks. The textbook was Hunter's Civic Biology. The ACLU agreed to take his case, and Herbert and Sue Hicks were friends of Scopes who agreed to prosecute. Scopes was arrested but subsequently released on a $1,000 bond. The town of Dayton was then overwhelmed by scores of people coming to see the trial. The trial pinned two sides against one another. The main question at the heart of the case was whether evolution should be taught in public schools. The judge was Judge John T. Ralston, who was said to crave publicity but was also a conservative Christian. After the trial, Clarence Darrow stated to the Baltimore Sun, "Judge Ralston was elected on a fluke and is now campaigning for re-election this fall. The trial was part of his campaign." The Fundamentalists, or the prosecution, were led by William Jennings Bryan, A.T. Stewart, Ben B. McKenzie, and William Jennings Bryan, Jr. Upon arriving in Dayton, William Jennings Bryan told reporters for the New York Times, "The contest between Christianity and evolution is a duel to the death." The ACLU, with the modernist views, were the defense and were led by Clarence Darrow, John Neal, Dudley Feed Malone, and Arthur Garfield Hayes. The case opened on July 10, 1925, and the defense immediately set to suppress the indictment on both state and federal constitutionality grounds that the statute violated the Constitution. This was denied by Judge Ralston. The opening statements pinned the idea of good versus evil against one another. Bryan stated, "If evolution wins, Christianity goes." Darrow responded in his opening remarks, "Scopes isn't on trial, civilization is on trial." The prosecution, Darrow contended, was opening the doors for a reign of bigotry equal to anything in the Middle Ages. To the gasp of spectators, Darrow said Bryan was responsible for the foolish, mischievous, and wicked act. Darrow said that the anti-evolution law made the Bible the yardstick to measure every man's intellect, to measure every man's intelligence, and to measure every man's learning. This was typical of Darrow's argument that seemed so anti-Christian that many liberal theologians and organizations feel it may turn public support against the case. On the seventh day of the trial, what followed was what the New York Times described as the most amazing court scene in Anglo-Saxon history. Hayes asked that William Jennings Bryan be called to the stand as an expert on the Bible. Bryan assented, stipulating only that he should have a chance to interrogate the defense lawyers. Bryan, dismissing the concerns of his prosecution colleagues, took a seat on the witness stands and immediately began fanning himself. Darrow questioned him on the Bible. The end result was that Bryan and Darrow were yelling at one another, and Judge Ralston ordered the court adjourned and forbid Bryan from taking the stand again. Both men received great criticism for their outburst on that day on the stand. On the eighth day of the trial, Darrow asked the jury to return a verdict guilty in order that the case might be appealed to the Tennessee Supreme Court. The jury complied with Darrow's request, and Judge Ralston fined him $100. 6 days after the trial, William Jennings Bryan died in his sleep. A year later, the Tennessee Supreme Court reversed the decision of the Dayton court on a technicality, but not the constitutionality grounds that Darrow had hoped. According to the court, the fine should have been set by the jury and not the Judge Ralston. Rather than send the case back for further action, however, the Tennessee Supreme Court dismissed the case and commented, "Nothing is to be gained by prolonging the life of this very bizarre case." The Butler Act itself was repealed in 1967 in Epperson versus the state of Arkansas and represented a significant setback for the fundamentalist movement.
Take the end!